On Glenn's side, he's playing a list very similar to the list that we saw Jerry Thompson running. It's not card for card the same thing. He's not playing a copy of Soul of Innistrad. Instead, he has opted for just a little more removal in the main deck. He has two... Well, I guess it's just the... I'll back it up. It's the same amount of removal in the main deck. He does have a singleton copy of Elvish Mystic that we've seen him draw at a couple points over the tournament.
He has a second Thoughtseize in his list as well, where Jerry only has the one in the main deck. So there are some very slight differences, but it is essentially the same deck.
Yeah. Be interesting to see how it does against different configurations of Abzan midrange. As you can recall, though, there's a lot of really strong Abzan cards in the format, so there can be a lot of variety in these midrange decks.
Definitely. I mean, there's a boatload of powerful 4 and 5 mana cards to choose from. A bunch of good removal spells to select from. So these decks, Abzan midrange, Abzan reanimator, they're never at a loss for quality cards to choose from. And now with Jerry out of the tournament, Glenn is the top overall seed remaining. He will be on the play for this match, and if he advances to the finals against Brad as well.
Yeah. So we are underway here. Glenn Jones as the 2 seed and the remaining highest seed in the tournament gets to be on the play. He starts off on a pair of Temple of Silence, setting up his draws here. Does not have, he has green mana in his hand, just doesn't have it in play yet. And it'll be Sheldon with the first creature. That's Sylvan Caryatid on his side. And it's so interesting in these matchups how you can get a deck like Abzan Reanimator, or both these decks really, that just have no plays until turn 4 and have that still be okay in the matchup.
Both of these decks have a lot of catch-up, though. You know, Whip of Erebos, and you've undone the first 5 turns of your opponent attacking you. A Siege Rhino can be much the same thing, so these decks can take some liberties in the first couple turns, not really advancing their board very much because they have some really powerful tools to get it all back.
A Thoughtseize from Sheldon shows the texture here of Glenn's hand. He's got 2 kill spells, the Murderous Cut and the Hero's Downfall, 2 pretty decent threats in Whip of Erebos and Siege Rhino, and then a Reclamation Sage to go along with his 4th land.
The easiest thing to do here is just get the Whip of Erebos out of the hand. That's the card that gives Glenn an advantage in the matchup. Even though Sheldon does have a couple answers to it in his deck, I would just get it off the table.
Yeah, second Sylvan Caryatid and a Temple for Sheldon. Really setting up nicely to play some late game cards. But by taking Whip, it does allow Glenn to play this Siege Rhino.
But a Siege Rhino is rarely going to be good enough on its own. These decks have so much removal, so many good blockers. You can see Sheldon already moving an Abzan Charm around in his hand here, so the Siege Rhinos are good, but it's very rare that an uncontested Siege Rhino on the 4th turn just runs away with the game.
And we'll go back over to Sheldon. He's going to Abzan Charm away the Siege Rhino. And Thoughtseize again on his own. So dissecting Glenn's hand here. Sees another copy of Siege Rhino. He'll take that. He's leaving Glenn with just kill spells.
So this is a very good start for Sheldon, but you can also see some of the issue in the matchup. It's tough for Sheldon to get too much forward progress going, and all it takes is a Whip of Erebos from Glenn to undo all this work. Now, if Sheldon's able to find one of his Planeswalkers, the board's stable enough that it's going to be awesome for him.
And has been the case a lot today. Glenn plays a Satyr Wayfinder. He's going to go ahead and miss there, but he mills 2 Hornet Queens along with a Siege Rhino. So in the case that Glenn finds the Whip, it'll have plenty of targets.
Yep.
In the meantime, with Sheldon that's now going to move to the offensive, he finally plays a creature of his own in Siege Rhino. Glenn is all too happy to Murderous Cut. Still leaving his graveyard with a lot of good creatures.
And no rush, Glenn's still sitting on a Hero's Downfall here. So he's got protection against the first big threat of the first Planeswalker.
So Glenn has a 1-of copy of Reclamation Sage in his hand. Are there any targets at all in Sheldon's deck for that?
Courser of Crufix. That's it.
All right, Sheldon will cast one of his main deck copies of Read the Bones here. This is something we did not see in Allspock's deck, but one that I figure is decent in this matchup.
It's fine. I mean, we see Abzan Charm draw 2 cards a lot in this matchup, so you'd expect Read the Bones to be good. I'm surprised that Sheldon decided to keep the Courser Crufix there as one of the 2 cards when he knows there's a Reclamation Sage in Glenn Jones' hand, rather. I think I would prefer to bottom both of them.
And Courser of Krufix to play for Sheldon. No land off the top, but he has a Hero's Downfall waiting for him. And that is the target that Glenn needed, so here's Reclamation Sage to take care of it.
Yeah, like I said, I would have just preferred to bottom both.
Sheldon draws the copy of Hero's Downfall. And it will be Sorin Solemn Visitor from Sheldon. And while Glenn has answers right now, he doesn't have threats of his own. Eventually one of these is going to stick.
Yeah. He does have he has a downfall to answer the first one here, but Sheldon's got a lot of draw steps and Glenn's not putting on any pressure really.
Sorin makes a Vampire token. Glenn will go ahead and get to look at the hand here. It was 3 copies of Hero's Downfall. Glenn will take care of one of them. It's a lot of good backup for Sheldon. However, if Glenn does find Whip of Erebos, it's hard. Almost no number of Hero's Downfalls will take care of that.
Exactly. Any individual threat here, Sheldon can obviously answer very easily, but if he's able to find Whip of Erebos or Hornet Queen, forget about it.
Yeah, and Downfall on Glenn's side actually makes this game a lot of a staring match. You see 2 Downfalls in Sheldon's hand, but his only attack right now is a 2/2 Vampire. That's a lot of time that Glenn's going to have. As both players just start drawing cards. More removal out of Sheldon's hand, but this one's a little bit better. It's Whip of Erebos.
Yeah, the other end here that Sheldon just picked up is great because it means he can answer that card. And that's the most problematic card that Glenn can find at this point, since he does not have enough mana to cast a Hornet Queen just yet.
Glenn finds Satyr Wayfinder. This time he actually gets a land off it. It's a Temple of Malady. Glenn will scry to the bottom with it. If Glenn sets up to 8 mana by the time he finds a whip, then even Utter End won't be a good answer for it. He'll be able to whip a Hornet Queen without letting go of priority.
And at that point, Sheldon's basically just looking at the 1 copy of Dune Blast in his deck to get out from under it.
So because he's running things like Read the Bones and Doom Blast, correct me if I'm wrong here, Sheldon does not have any of these main deck Doomwake Giants that we've been seeing.
He has 0. His threat base is Courser, Siege Rhino, a Nissa, 3 Elspeths, 2 Sorins. So yeah, lighter on threats as a result.
And those Hero's Downfalls burning a hole in Sheldon's hand. One of them actually takes care of Reclamation Sage here. And the Vampire continues its attacks. Glenn, you see on his life pad there, 20, 18, 16, 14, 12, 10. 5 more hits and that should do it. Courser of Krufix is the play for Sheldon. As now he'll start digging through his deck much faster. Gets a Windswept Heath off the top. And one thing you notice here, Sheldon using his opponent's Urborg to tap his Windswept Heath when needed. He actually has managed to, up to this point, keep a Windswept Heath untapped so that if he drew a Courser, he'd have a lot more control over his deck. That's really paid off for him here.
Yeah, it's very subtle, but that operations matters a lot because it amounts to a fresh draw step if he's able to keep those Windswept Heath until the moment he really needs it.
Glenn with a really important draw. It's a copy of Commune with the Gods. It'll find a Courser of Krufix. Courser flipping the top card. No land there, but it is another Commune. So you have to think at this pace, Glenn's going to find a whip in no time.
Or a Hornet Queen. Now we've reached that point of the game where that card's a very good draw as well.
Yeah, you don't actually have to be a Reanimator deck. You can just cast Hornet Queen. That's a card these Abzan decks use in the mirror all the time. You can just cast one for 7, and it's pretty decent.
Though I will say that that Courser on top of Sheldon's deck was a spot where I would have considered using a Windswept Heath. The second Courser is worth a lot less than the first one.
Sheldon does play a second Courser, and I think you're right if you're on Sheldon's side. It does represent double life gain, but because this match is about keeping Glenn's Hornet Queens and Whips in check, I'm just not sure how much incremental life gain really matters on Sheldon's side.
Particularly with Glenn in no position to attack. I mean, he's got 2 Wayfinders as his board against your 2 walls. He's not going anywhere.
Well, a land there from Sheldon gains and nets him 2 life and shows him the way to an Elspeth Sun's Champion next turn. Sheldon will swing in for 4. It's possible he kept the Courser because it's actually a decent attacker right here, as you see him knocking Glenn down to 7.
Sure.
Glenn casts Commune with the Gods. It's going to find Satyr Wayfinder. That was the only target for it. And Glenn may just be milling his cards in the wrong order. He may mill his lands to Commune and his whips to Wayfinder. And that's exactly what's going to happen. Wayfinder finds a copy of bins a copy of Whip of Erebos, finds a second copy of Urborg.
Perfect.
If you could you should switch the order of those 2.
Just how he drew it up.
This army of Satyr Wayfinders on Glenn's side. They've got quite an uphill task. As swing for 6 from Sheldon, and Glenn may just be beaten to death by Courser of Krufix.
He never got anything going. This is a weakness of the Reanimator deck at times. Is when it doesn't find Whip of Erebos or Hornet Queen, it's doing a lot less impressive stuff than just the mid-range build this deck does.
Yeah, I think you really hit it there. What mid-range has going for it, in general, all these black-green decks that we see, is that every card is a good card. No matter what you draw, it's something powerful. On Glenn's side, he draws things like Satyr Wayfinders sometimes, and that's just not objectively a very good card.
The Sorens and Elspeth versus Satyr Wayfinders has been noticeable this game. You know?
Yeah.
Sheldon's deck is just more dense with stuff that matters. Glenn is leaning on 1 or 2 cards.
It's not to say Glenn's playing too many weak cards. He's still an Abzan deck at heart.
Yeah, no, there's plenty of power in here, but you know,
Sheldon's has a little more, is just a little higher of a density of it. And that's really shows here. Elspeth Sun's champion the play for Sheldon. He's got a second one on top of his deck with Glenn at 5. Maybe even Hornet Queen is not enough at this point.
Sheldon might just have enough stuff in play to slog through it, which we almost never see.
Yeah, Hornet Queen 5. In this matchup, if you don't have Doomwake Giant, you basically just have to attack through a Hornet Queen, which that is not a fun thing to do. It costs you 5 creatures.
But Sheldon's got that to spare now with Elspeth.
He sure does. Siege Rhino for Glenn will put him up to 8. May stabilize him for a turn. But the draw is another Elspeth for Sheldon. Temple of Malady on top of the deck. He's going to get very aggressive here. -3 the Elspeth. That will kill the Siege Rhino. A swing with the team. Glenn will chump block with 1 Satyr Wayfinder.
I like this line of play a lot. Sheldon's got a spare Elspeth, and Glenn's in no position to attack an Elspeth anyway. So I like being very aggressive and getting the Siege Rhino off the table.
Completely agree, because if you get the Siege Rhino, like the reason you need to get it off the table is Glenn's best draws, one of his best draws is Whip of Erebos. And a great way to fight Whip of Erebos, as we saw last round, is to just get all the high-powered creatures off your opponent's table. Then when they play it, they don't actually have that much life to gain. Mm-hmm. And Siege, Whip into a Siege Rhino attack is very good for Glenn. Whip into a Satyr Wayfinder attack, that one Sheldon's probably okay with.
Yeah. Well, there is the top deck that Glenn needed.
It's the Whip of Erebos. So, like I said before, great call on Sheldon's part to not make to get rid of the Siege Rhino.
Yeah.
This still may be good enough, but it's going to be hard. Hornet Queen is just that good. So Glenn will whip back Hornet Queen. Hornet Queen's going to swing in to try to take down the Suns champion. And here's the play for...
Yep.
You see Sheldon says, utter end targeting whip. Glenn, a smirk, slow nod, and he'll scoop him up going to game 2.
Like I mentioned, that's one of the big cards that Sheldon has access to game 1 that we really haven't seen out of the other Abzan mid-range decks. And it came up, had utter end for Whip of Erebos. Glenn was still probably up against the ropes, but that was the last bid that Sheldon needed to lock up the first game.
And this is really a steal for Sheldon, as you said. This is the first game. You said that game 1 is solidly in the camp of Abzan Reanimator. It gets closer post-board. And while those players get ready for that, we're going to bring you back into the booth. For those of you following us, we are watching the top 4 semifinal match between Glenn Jones and Sheldon Freerksen. The winner will go on to face Brad Nelson's Jeskai Tokens deck. But we do some premium giveaway here. This is going to be 6 months, which is double what we gave away last round. Rules of the game. Patrick's going to ask you a question this round. If you believe you know the answer, hop onto Twitter. Tweet the answer at SCG Live with the hashtag SCG Premium on it. You still have until the end of the round to submit the answer.
So we've been talking about the points of differentiation with a lot of the Abzan mid-range decks because there's a lot of room for customization. And Sheldon Freerksen, who we just saw pick up the first game in the semifinals against Glenn Jones, has a main deck copy, a single copy of a big spell, a big sweeper. We typically only see in the Abzan mid-range sideboards. He's playing 1 in the main deck. Can you name that spell? 7 mana, all 3 colors, very powerful in mid-range creature matchups.
Yeah.
So tweet your answer at SCG Live, hashtag SCG Premium, and of the correct responses, one will be selected for 6 months of Star City Games premium content.
We'll get back into the match. That's a card that could really feature in this matchup too. It's pretty good.
I think it'll probably come up post-board.
Going over to Sheldon's sideboard, we'll say here, they usually have a lot of tools for this matchup. He does have an Unravel the Aether. Whip of Erebos is still a really important card.
So a lot of really powerful stuff to bring in here. I like bringing in the 3rd and 4th copies of Read the Bones because it's just going to be a slow, grinding matchup. He's got 2 copies of End Hostilities, a 2nd copy of Dune Blast to bring in, an additional Utter End, an Unravel the Aether, a Bio Blight, the 2 Nissas. There's a lot to like. Sheldon's got a real sideboard for this matchup.
So I got a couple of questions about this because there's some interesting options Sheldon can take. A lot of times you see Abzan midrange be the aggro deck in this matchup, simply because cards like Hornet Queen and Whip of Erebos are so good at the late game. But with a sideboard package that goes up to 4 copies of Read the Bones, with some End Hostilities, a fair amount of sweepers, can Sheldon be the control deck here, or do you still want to stay on this aggressive plan?
I think that Sheldon can kind of take 2 roles here. The initial one is being aggressive. Then if Glenn is able to blunt the offense, then he can kind of shift into leaning on End Hostilities and Dune Blast to give him a superior late game. There's still no guarantee that that's good enough because an unchecked Whip of Erebos can be better than Sheldon's sweepers. So I don't think he can sideboard purely into a control deck. But I do think that he is not necessarily beat in the long game, which is likely to be the case in game 1. So he does have the option of being a little bit more controlling, but I still think he wants to be pretty threat dense and pretty aggressive at his base.
Over on Glenn's side, we got to see the sideboard out of Jerry Thompson last round. Glenn's sideboard is somewhat different here. You see that copy of Soul of Innistrad, first of all. That was something that was in the main deck for Jerry. Glenn has one in the board. I really liked it in Jerry's deck. Imagine Glenn will put it in for this matchup.
You saw how long that game went on for. All these games have gone on for a pretty long time, so I think Soul of Innistrad is great. I think the copy of Freerksen is very good here as well. In a protracted game, making a bunch of Death Touch Snakes is very, very powerful. I think the 3 copies of Glare of Heresy are good here. Sheldon's got, Elspeth, Siege Rhinos, plenty of stuff to remove. So I think Sheldon's the one making the big upgrades in this matchup, though. He's bringing in cards that fundamentally alter the matchup, and Glenn is just bringing in a couple upgrades on some of his removal slots.
How do you feel about a card like Anafenza the Foremost? Glenn talked to me about that card, and he has liked it, and against these Sultai Reanimator decks, he felt like it was strong. It's just, it's a great answer to something like Sidisi. It's just pretty big. Now, against a Siege Rhino deck, there's some difficulty in running the card.
I would be stunned if Glenn brought it in, because Sheldon's not using his graveyard for anything. I think Glenn's kind of the control deck of the matchup, and it's trivial for Sheldon to just get rid of a 3-mana 4/4. It's got Abzan Charms, Heroes Downfalls, Utter Ends, and so forth. So I think that Anafenza is very good against the Mirror Match or against Sultai decks that are using their graveyard as a resource. Against Sheldon, I think it's nonsense.
Well, Brad Nelson awaits in the finals with Jeskai tokens. Will it be Sheldon Freerksen and Abzan midrange, or Glenn Jones with the more recent Abzan Reanimator that faces him in the finals? Glenn's down a game. He's your number 2 seed.
I really like Sheldon's list a lot. I still would play Jeskai tokens if I was going to play in a tournament, if I was playing the Invitational next weekend or something like that. But so many of these Abzan mid-range decks we've had on camera this week have been completely unprepared for Whip of Erebos and Jeskai Ascendancy to an extent that I think is odd, because it's trivial to add a couple Banishing Lights, get a couple Utter Ends into the deck, and Sheldon has gone ahead and done that, and I think it helps him quite a bit against the top decks in the field.
When I look at Jeskai tokens, and I don't want to crown a king too soon, we oftentimes see later on in a standard season a quote-unquote best deck to start to show up. And while this may or may not be it, I'll say this, Jeskai tokens, to me, it feels like a best deck, or like one of those decks that's just going to be... Remember when we saw Mono Blue Devotion last season, and when you started seeing it play, you saw this deck's tier 1, and I feel like it's going to be tier 1 for the next 6 months. And I don't know how to quantify it very well, but Jeskai tokens has that feel to me.
It may just force the Abzan mid-range decks to adapt their removal slots a little bit. Like I said, I think Sheldon's inclusion of 2 copies of Utter End is just such a good choice for this weekend. And if he runs into Brad in the finals, with up a game, Glenn Mulligan to 5 looks pretty likely, those Utter Ends give him some game against Jeskai Ascendancy. And the rest of his deck is good at blocking. It's not like he's going to lose to a sea of tokens.
Yeah, it's not the kind of deck that you can't beat. I just think it's just like on the surface, it's so powerful.
Yeah. You got to be prepared for it. That's definitely the case.
Well, Glenn on a mull to 5, so he's down 3 cards in this Abzan mirror. He'll fire up a Thoughtseize, sees a boat full of lands on Sheldon's side, along with 2 card advantage engines. You see that Read the Bones and a Course of Freerksen. Actually 3 if you count the Abzan Charm.
What a perfect hand for this kind of matchup. With both players settling in for a really long game, having access to 4 Abzan Charms and 4 Read the Bones is awesome.
This is the kind of hand that I think Glenn really doesn't want to see because there's no good way to attack it. Glenn's down 3 cards thanks to his 2 mulligans. So what that means is he's going to have to fight on something other than a card advantage axis. But Sheldon's hand is just so consistent. It has temples, it has perfect mana, it has 3 2-for-1s. What these black decks do that's so punishing is when its opponent's on a mulligan, they do a really good job of just continuing that card number game where, I'll 2-for-1 you, I'll 2-for-1 you, I'm just gonna bury you under my more cards, and this hand's great at doing it.
Now, Glenn does have a second copy of Thoughtseize in his hand, which means he can go after the card drawing spells, and if he has a way to kill Courser, he's, that's a game plan at least. The second Thoughtseize means that this hand has a game plan.
Now, what if Sheldon has a second copy of Courser, which was his draw?
Then it gets much worse, and he's got to hope that Sheldon doesn't find action for a very long time.
Yeah, there is some reprieve. I believe all of Sheldon's lands come into play tapped here. You're right, this sideboard plan from Sheldon's just great. His draw for that turn, another Abzan Charm. There's so many divinations in his deck right now. Glenn just can't take them all.
And he gets to play his divination effects into broad strokes answers like Heroes, Downfalls, and Utter Ends that catch anything that Glenn's up to. And Satyr Wayfinder just not batting a very good average here for Glenn.
It reminds me almost of a blue-white deck from previous seasons where it's just a bunch of divinations and a bunch of kill spells. Course of Freerksen the play for Sheldon. And here you see Thoughtseize on top, just broad, generic answers. And Glenn, this is going to be hard. He's going to lose his hand very quickly here.
And all of, Glenn's power comes from being able to get to a lot of mana. He's not going to be able to do very much on 3 or 4 lands.
Yeah, Sheldon's deck is grinding in every way you'd expect a black-green deck to grind. Courser will slowly net him extra cards. Read the Bones will net him extra cards. Thoughtseize will take care of Glenn's cards. The end game for Sheldon is for him to have a hand of 5 cards and Glenn to have one of 0, and for the board to still just be a bunch of Coursers staring at each other.
And for Glenn to not be able to stick anything that Sheldon can't handle. That's another important part of this too. There's nothing that can slip through the cracks. No particular card type where there's no plan.
So I think what Glenn hopes to have happen here is he top decks lands, and then on a key turn, he draws a Hornet Queen and casts it. And then he hopes Sheldon doesn't have a sweeper, which Sheldon now does have a lot of.
Yep. A lot of things have to go right.
Course of Freerksen was the play for Glenn Jones. He does not find a land on top, so he missed his land drop for the turn. You see here Sheldon just continuing the generic answers game. Plays land 5. For free, he drew a Thoughtseize. There's another Thoughtseize waiting on top.
I mean, this turn he has an opportunity to play a Thoughtseize and a Siege Rhino.
Ugh. And just the card advantage engine is grinding here. Goes and fetches for a Plains. And you're right, here's Siege Rhino stealing 3 life. Sheldon out the biggest creature on the board. And the Thoughtseize you mentioned, Hornet Queen and Glare of Heresy. Though Glare takes care of Siege Rhino, Sheldon's not protecting his own threats at all. He's taking care of Glenn's. That's the game plan.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised to see him take Hornet Queen there because it means that if Glenn Jones draws Whip of Erebos, he's got a shot of getting the Hornet Queen into play. And the Glare of Heresy takes care of the Siege Rhino. I think I would have just stranded the Hornet Queen and asked Glenn to beat a Siege Rhino.
The Satyr Wayfinder is going to go ahead and find a temple. Land for Glenn. The Glare of Heresy, the Siege Rhino. Yeah, I think the point of putting, you don't want to put the Hornet Queen in the graveyard makes a lot of sense. I'm not so worried about Glenn removing the Siege Rhino because if I'm Sheldon, I have so many Read the Bones and Abzan Charms that I'll just draw, I'll find another threat. That much is fine.
Sure, but there's no reason to risk
There's no reason to just give away a threat if you don't have to.
Yes, you probably win a 15-turn game, but there's no reason not to try to win the 8-turn game if it looks like that's going to be easy to do.
It's true. Glenn swings a Satyr Wayfinder and passes back. Looking at Sheldon's hand, he has a Read the Bones. Freshly drawn that turn. Another Courser, an Abzan Charm, a Thoughtseize. Great weapons here. He'll get more card advantage with a second Courser, gaining 2 up to 24 as he plays Landmark Wastes off the top of the deck. And it's another draw 2 on top of the deck. It's Abzan Charm.
And you can see Sheldon has enough draw 2s that he can afford to be pretty aggressive with his attacks here.
Yeah, 4 Abzan Charms and 4 Read the Bones post board is just brutal.
And he can use Abzan Charms as pump spells if he wants to.
Yeah, he'll use Read the Bones to scry to the bottom. Draws Abzan Charm. Draws Landmark Wastes. Thoughtseize again on top. Just generic answer after generic answer here.
A great recipe.
I think one of the arguments, I still want to go one last thing about that turn before. You can probably Thoughtseize the Glare of Heresy because you have another Thoughtseize coming that next turn.
Yeah, I think that the Hornet Queen's more threatening in the graveyard than in hand. And you get to keep a Siege Rhino that Glenn has no answer to.
Now Glenn is at 12. See right here. Glenn playing a Temple. Glenn has Murderous Cut on top of the deck. That's not the kind of spell Glenn wants here, though, even though it can be good in this matchup.
Well, the problem is there's no real good route for Glenn at all right now.
Sheldon will Thoughtseize. In response, Glenn plays his last card. That's another copy of Murderous Cut. Thoughtseize will not have a target. Courser of Freerksen continues to swing in for Sheldon.
I believe Sheldon did know that was the last card in hand.
And now you see Abzan Charms and Read the Bones in Sheldon's hand. Time to find more threats. Here's an Abzan Charm. It's going to draw 2. Draws Sylvan Caryatid and Windswept Heath. See Glenn here taking note of each card as Sheldon draws it. One thing with Courser of Freerksen, even if you're casting a spell like Abzan Charm, you have to show all your intermediate draws.
Yeah, the top card of the deck is always revealed.
Even during the middle of a spell, which sometimes can be confusing. And Sylvan Caryatid the play for Sheldon. He's going to draw another Thoughtseize.
And that's the spot where I think if I was Sheldon, I would want to play the Windswept Heath in lieu of the Sandstorm Citadel because I do not want to draw Thoughtseize next turn.
Though you always want to play your tapped lands when you don't have a card to cast. I think you're absolutely right here. Glenn draws Murderous Cut. Top card is Satyr Wayfinder.
The only way that Thoughtseize ends up not being a dead draw is if Glenn draws a Hornet Queen that Sheldon is aware of, and then he can take care of it.
Say Glenn commune with the gods into Hornet Queen. That could be a situation where Glenn could draw Hornet Queen and not have enough mana to cast it immediately.
Well, he doesn't have enough mana right now, and you're getting to see the top card of his deck. So it's still possible for that to just come up. But
yep. More draw 2s from Sheldon. This one's Abzan Charm. Glenn has to decide if he wants to kill Courser in response. He does not. So Thoughtseize, Sylvan Caryatid, the draws for Sheldon. And now with Temple on top, Sheldon will get to play that one for free from Courser of Freerksen. Siege Rhino's on top. Does he want to keep it or look for something bigger? Looks like the Rhino is big enough.
Yeah, I had to imagine that's better than a random draw at this stage.
Certainly is above average. I think it's how high is the bar that Sheldon, what are the finishers that Sheldon's drawing to? Siege Rhino on this board looks pretty good.
Any of his Planeswalkers will be powerful right now?
Yeah, I think it's because he knows right now Glenn has Murderous Cut in hand. It might be a reason to ship it. Just say, hey, I'm just digging for Planeswalkers. But Siege Rhino's just too good.
Yeah.
Glenn's at 10. This guy's, it'll put him to 7. Satyr Wayfinder the draw for Glenn. There's at least one land on top of his deck. So he'll get a Windswept Heath. He mills a copy of Hornet Queen. So if he draws a whip, he'll have, well, now 2 Hornet Queens in the yard. Plays a free Temple of Malady off the top. That goes to the bottom, shows another card. It's Glare of Heresy. So he has another answer ready for Siege Rhino. And Siege Rhino the draw for Sheldon. And Courser just doing so much work on both sides here.
Although at this point he's doing more work for Glenn than for Sheldon, because the card advantage that Courser's generated is sort of blunted by the fact that a lot of the cards left in Sheldon's hand are lands he has not had an opportunity to play. So yes, he's drawing cards, but only sort of.
Well, if you think about the cards they have to draw to, the best cards Sheldon can draw to are some Planeswalkers, whereas none of them are as powerful as a whip that that Glenn rather could draw to.
And to go back a little bit to that, the play involving the Thoughtseize is taking the Hornet Queen over the Glare. At this point, it's not like Glenn's mulligan to 5. At this point, both players have more than enough resources to operate, and now it's just about what cards are you drawing. So you can't get too hung up on the fact that your opponent mulligan to 5, because in these coarser mirror matches, eventually that stops mattering.
This is a top deck war.
You make your land drops, and now if I told you to say you're just walking into this game and I'm asking you who mulligan to 5, you wouldn't be 100% confident it was Glenn.
I'd probably say Glenn, because look at all Sheldon sure has a lot of cards in play, but not 100% sure. Sheldon, Glenn now has enough cards to justify firing off a Thoughtseize. He's going to go ahead and take the Murderous Cut so that he can now cast Siege Rhino.
Yeah, he's bottlenecked Glenn's hand here with a lot of removal, and now can deploy his Rhino, which is great.
He Thoughtseizes both cards away, and actually Sheldon has a lot of bases covered here. The top card of his deck is one of his sideboarded Unravel the Aethers that will deal with a Whip of Erebos if Glenn were to find one.
Or the Doomwake Giant on top. So this is good stuff.
Doomwake Giant, the draw from Glenn. Basic Forest on top of the deck. He'll play that one for free. Goes up to 10. Next card in waiting is another Windswept Teeth. Glenn probably has no interest in that. Still does have 2 basics left in his deck to find. And it's going to be Doomwake Giant. Shrinks things but doesn't kill anything. Unravel the Aether is the draw for Sheldon, and it's another Siege Rhino in waiting.
And can Sheldon just close this game out with beating down? The problem is that there is a risk with him getting too aggressive with his disenchant effects, because if he leaves himself with no answer to Whip of Erebos, that can still steal this game for Glenn.
And remember that Unravel the Aether just puts the card back in the deck. And when their decks start to get small here, Glenn can redraw them.
And he's got a lot of looks at it too, because he's got a Windswept Teeth.
Yeah, and Sheldon has gone aggressive here. He Unraveled the Aether to the Doomwake Giant so that he can attack with Siege Rhino here, which is interesting because Glenn's draw was pretty bad. So he's actually, in some ways, giving Glenn a free look at a new draw.
Glenn gets the free look anyway because of the Windswept Teeth.
Yeah. Well, now I suppose he gets 2 free. He gets 2 free looks.
Yeah.
I think my main worry is that now Sheldon doesn't have an answer to the whip at the moment. He's going to swing in, though. Glenn's going to go down to 9. This is all before Siege Rhino hits. It's down to 9, back up to 10.
I mean, I get what Sheldon's doing here, try to close this game out quickly. The problem is that if he leaves the Doomwake Giant in play, it's just a staring contest. And even the whip getting activated once here is really bad for Sheldon. So maybe he just has to hope that it doesn't come up.
I think you're right, because even if he has this instant speed removal for the whip, Glenn can play it and whip a Hornet Queen before Sheldon gets to do anything. And that's no good. Glenn's top card is Caves of Koilos. He is out of free shuffles. No whip will be drawn this turn. Sheldon continues to play lands. This one's a fetch land. Glenn's down to 6. There's another Siege Rhino on top of Sheldon's deck. Glenn's life total is getting really low. As he draws Caves of Koilos, goes to 7. Top card is Courser of Crufix. I don't think Glenn's going to find the whip in time.
I don't think so either.
He needed that next card down to be a Whip of Erebos or a Commune with the Gods or something that could find a whip.
And there's another Siege Rhino on top. And
what's that, the 3rd Siege Rhino?
Yep.
Well, I've said in most matchups, it is very hard for any deck to beat 3 running Siege Rhinos.
I'm surprised that Sheldon is not attacking with the Courser Crufix here as well, because if Glenn does not block the Siege Rhino, he's just dead. So I understand Glenn can just put Courser in front of your Courser, but it at least influences his block some amount.
Yeah,
there's no reason not to. There's no reason not to. It's
the end
free.
result looks like it's going to be the same.
Yeah.
Which is Glenn takes 3 trample damage from the Rhino. So Glenn goes to 4. He's going to go to 1 off this other Siege Rhino. 1-23. Things look grim here for Glenn Jones.
I mean, even if he has a land on top of his deck, he only goes to 3, and the Siege Rhino on top does it. Okay.
That does gain life. Fetch lands are very good in this spot. He still has 1 land left to fetch. That's becoming a relevant thing. Windswept Heath will gain him 2 life. He goes up to 3.
Yeah, so he goes from 2 to 4, which means he can chump block all 3 creatures. Courser in front of Rhino, Courser in front of Rhino, Wayfinder in front of Courser. The Siege Rhino trigger only knocks him to 1, and life goes on.
He's going to fetch down to 2, up to 4. He's going to lose his whole team. And at that point, I'm not even sure whipping back Hornet Queen is enough. Fetches on upkeep, goes down to 2. Land comes into play up to 4. This is exactly what you mentioned. He has 1 turn.
Yeah, the problem is that the Siege Rhino's trample, so even Hornet Queen
may not be enough.
Yeah, Glenn may be just too low anyway. Still, I thought that Glenn was just dead on board. I forgot the possibility of flipping over a fetch land, which lets him get out of this turn.
Yeah, that is his last basic. And is this top card a whip? It is not. It's another land. So Sheldon Freerksen, he's going to move on to the finals with Abzan midrange. Going to have that last shot at taking down Jeskai tokens. This will be him versus Brad Nelson in our finals.
I think Sheldon's main deck and sideboard plan for this matchup was great. Better than any of the other ones we've seen out of Abzan midrange this weekend. A couple copies of Utter End, a Doom Blast in the main deck, more sweepers in the sideboard, the ability to go up to 4 copies of Breathe the Bones alongside 4 copies of Abzan Charm.